Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Okay, well, Mick and I are back here to talk about Stoicism and how we apply it in our day to day. We were talking before this, Mick, and I think we're going to jump right into a topic here, which is I had a circumstance happen yesterday, and things started to really escalate with a stranger, someone I didn't know. And I think today we were going to talk about what happens in those circumstances, how to deal with it, and how to retain your self control, and how would a Stoic maybe deal with it. So, what do you
Absolutely.
think
And I
about that?
think, yeah, no, I think your example, and thanks for agreeing to share it, because I do think it ties what you and I talk about to real life, right? Because something similar to what you're going to describe happens every day, right? All around the world. And it's important to discuss because anger, controlling one's anger, um, is a big part of Stoicism. And I think it's a big part of, especially males, life. But there's times when there's cause to be angry too. So I think we have a lot to discuss today that will relate to a lot of people listening.
Yeah, I think so too. I think especially today, it seems like um, in general, people tend to be quite volatile right now. It seems to be a time where people are finding it difficult to not be volatile at times, you and I have definitely talked about this a little bit. And so, this isn't but today is also an interesting thing to talk about, because what we're not saying, we're not really doing the peace and love thing, because that also doesn't really help in some of these circumstances. But what we are talking about is that experience and how we kind of look at that, right? So I'll quickly talk about it. I'm gonna do the caveat as we lead into this, that like I will not be using this platform as anything more than a chance to talk about it, so maybe other people can learn from the experience, and I'm sure that I will learn from it by talking it through as well. I tend to be very retrospective and introspective when things happen, and so I definitely use my words to try and work through stuff. So I'm not using this at all to do that, but I do think it's important to use it as an example, because this is real life. Mick and I were talking about this. Mick said very flatly, he said, what sets us apart is we tend to be talking about real life stuff here, and I think that's a really valid point. So I'll quickly tell the story, which my partner, my parents, and my partner's children were out yesterday, and we were going to a thing and to do an activity, and after we'd arrived, we were walking up to the place to do the activity, and there was a person in the parking lot who visually, very openly, threw uh, garbage into a local creek that is runs alongside where the activity area is, and um, uh, uh, there was an interchange of words, and the person in the car who had thrown the garbage, because we were essentially saying don't litter, the person in the car who threw the garbage really escalated it quickly and came out of the car and was ready to charge at my partner. And I intervened because I didn't want my partner to be charged. So I jumped in the way, and then it really escalated where multiple people that were with this littering person came out, and there were threats against my life from that, and it escalated to this really ridiculous place. And Megan and I were talking about this a little bit. I struggled with that yesterday. In the moment, I did get very loud and very verbal to say, back off, like get away from me, like you better back away from me right now, right? Because for two reasons. One, I mean, I knew that I had to stand my ground because my partner and her children and my parents are nearby, and I don't, and they can focus on me. There was a point at which one of the members of the party came towards my partner, and I actually pushed my partner out of the way and stepped in between them, because I just said, there's no way that I'm not going to be taking the brunt of this. But also, when I get loud like that, they focus on me. But it was a tough moment, and I was very angry in that moment. I will say I was angry. I was angry at the fact that I had to do this, I think, while this we were preparing for this activity. So that's a very broad way to explain it, and a quick way to say it, but it escalated to it so severely. And so I was talking about it with Mick a bit, and I think we were going to talk a little bit about it. It was an interesting thing because I struggled with it myself. I am a pacifist first, but I also am not obtuse enough to think that when something like that occurs, you can just simply turn around and walk away, especially when there are um, innocent people or children nearby, right? So you do kind of have to stand up. But Mick, I mean, I'm interested on your take on this one because and you've been very supportive on this, and I do want to record that I'm very thankful of that. But I was interested in your take first because in some ways I'm still processing because I'm only about 24 hours out from it happening.
Sure. So I'll start with I am not a pacifist, even though I might want to say I am, but obviously my life choices would lead in the other direction. But I do think that, controlling one's anger, and I think you did. That's the point. But there is a time when you do have to show that you're not um, a pushover, because unfortunately in this world there are bullies, and bullies only get more of a bully if they get no opposition. I believe that in the national security sphere, whether you're Russia trying to invade a neighboring country or somebody who thinks it's okay to, with five adult males, to threaten to kill um, you and your partner. And for those people my age, what Adam means by partner is his girlfriend. Um, and I think there's a couple issues here, but I do think um, the ability to control one anger is, at least the way I look at it, you know, um, from a Stoics perspective, is twofold. One, if you can't, it's hard to make rational decisions. That is more about you. That's more about what, um, you know, which benefits you is not to make irrational decisions based on fury, right? As Seneca said, no man is made better by anger. That's what I think he's talking about. There's also the consequences to it. So the consequences would be if you have the ability to end this conflict without a physical confrontation, which you did, and I would say largely because you didn't back down, um, then that's the right answer. I think we can all agree that that's the right answer. If you don't have to have a physical confrontation, which could be consequential to, obviously, to physically to both of you, but also legally. We all live in some society and there's laws um, that you're going to have to pay for. In fact, no, I don't want to get on a tangent, but I was just overseas, had like a 10-minute conversation with somebody another military person from another country, who told me that his brother had been put in jail for life because of a fight that he got at a restaurant. Although it wasn't him that started it, it was three guys that started it. He hit somebody when they were down, and for whatever, and that person passed away. Just a unlucky hit. But point being is there's real consequences. So when we discuss these things, hopefully people think about it in their own life, and when they find themselves in a circumstance, they've already run through in their head how they would de-escalate and and control their temper so they can make those rational decisions.
Yeah, I think it's the one thing that I clung to in all of this was that I didn't lose control to the point where I couldn't think and I couldn't control my reactions, right? That's the one thing that has made me feel I'll say like I'm not a monster, right? Like it was tough. It's funny too because a lot of people are like, "How could Adam ever think of himself that way?" But you don't, when something like this happens, you wonder what's going to happen next, right? But the control I think is the key thing that I think we would always look at. Seneca says he essentially calls uh anger a madness, right? He essentially calls it like a form of insanity, like because you just can lose total control. And I don't think Seneca's saying never to get angry. I don't think he's saying you can't ever get angry. But I think what he is saying is you have to be aware of the idea that it is something that that can cause you to completely forget everything and just go red, right? As some people will say,
Yep.
or turn into this mindless rage machine, right? And I don't think like every 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 person who reads Stoicism eventually hears the story of I can't remember who it is, but there's a Stoic on a boat traveling somewhere, and the boat gets hit by a storm, and they see someone there who's looking incredibly scared, and they're feeling emotions, and they say, oh well, I'm a Stoic, and this person says, oh well, so I am I too, and they pull out a book, and I can't remember what the book is. And we've always believed as Stoics, not that we are automatons, that we are emotionless, but that we can control our emotions and they do not take over for us, right? And that's I think the key thing here, because I think if somebody were to ask me like what would I do differently, so yeah, maybe I wouldn't have used as much volume, although I did that for a reason, because when I use my volume, because I have been blessed with a large diaphragm due to genetics. When I use a large volume, it tends to push people back, which it did. And when I use a large volume, it made people focus on me instead of my partner, or my partner's children, or my other family members that were there, right? Which is a really important thing for me, right? But I didn't lose my control, and I didn't get physical, and I didn't do anything like that. But it was pretty tense there. And in fact, where all the other people in the neighborhood around us are like, "What's going on?" Right? It was
Yeah.
not great. But I think, yeah, I think it is one of those things where the control is the key part there. You can feel anger. In fact, I think it would be correct to say Stoics have felt anger throughout history,
Yeah.
but we choose to fight it in different ways. It is Stoic to fight it on a battlefield, to stand up against um, tyranny or naked aggression. And I think it's also Stoic to fight it in the courtroom and in the legislature. I think that's pretty
Yep.
normal for us. But that's it, and it probably feels like a stretch to say that those things kind of equate with what happened yesterday. But I think in some ways, though, to not completely go down this horrible, violent path, right? To not be like that person is almost more stoic. I'm struggling. I don't like I don't like trying to sound like I'm awesome. I'm not. I know I could have handled things differently yesterday, but I think just in general, I'm leaning heavily on the fact that like I didn't do something. I don't
Well, I,
regret something.
yeah. Well, I think part of journaling is mostly about reflection. So having these issues come up, which everybody does. Let's face it, society accepts assholes a lot more than they used to. Um, and there's a famous saying by Mike Tyson, the famous philosopher, that people would be a lot more polite if they get punched in the mouth every once in a while. And I'm not advocating for that, but people feel really emboldened now with social media and to talk a lot without really fearing the consequences. I used to coach boxing in the Marine Corps, and one thing that I always told my boxers is carry around a card for the gym. And if you get some guy, some blowhard in a bar or what have you, and they want to, you know, fight or what have you, hand them the card. Say, hey, you can come down to the gym. We'll sign waivers. We'll put some gloves on you, and we'll fight for 3 hours if you want to. Nobody will stop us, and nobody's going to go to jail. And you know how many guys take that card and actually show up at the gym? Zero, right? Or they would have been there already. So my point is this: this becomes more pressing now in the society that thinks it's okay to say things like these people said or get in your face
Yeah.
um, without any consequences. For whatever reason, they don't fear the consequences. So I agree with you. Stoics aren't shrinking violence. In fact, the opposite, right?
Yeah.
From Cato to Jim Mattis, right?
Yeah.
Very well to James Stockdale and Nelson Mandela, right? People who had the who were known for their stoic inklings, but fought the fight when they needed to, but also controlled their emotions because that is what matters, both to make the right decisions to de-escalate and, to be frank, to make the right decisions when it has gone violent,
Hmm.
on the battlefield. If you can't control your emotions, you're going to make bad decisions that are going to make you and your forces uh, lose the battle. Right. So that's why I
Yeah.
keep hitting it's twofold. You will make bad decisions if you cannot um, think clearly in the most turbulent times. That's part of controlling emotions. And then the second part is violence isn't the answer. It isn't. But sometimes you're not the one making the choice. Violence is being thrust upon you. You have to be prepared for that. And I think that is something that I would tell every person, man or woman, that
Yeah.
you can't just rely on the good nature of other people. I think we can all agree that human nature is such that it's not all good. In
Yeah.
fact, it's some of the worst things that ever happened on this planet
Yeah.
have come from us.
Absolutely. I think as human beings, violence is something that we're, well, because of what we come from genetically. I think that's something that's just expected to be there. But I also think that as human beings, we've gone beyond that, right? That's the thing. We don't settle things with a club. We just usually don't, right? And that's the key thing there. But I think, in terms of control and choice, the key thing here is also that you understand the consequences of your actions, right? And you understand what's going to happen next, and you make a choice, right? If you allow yourself to be so taken over by these feelings that it's really not you making the choice. It's more like you're on autopilot, and not the good kind of autopilot that keeps you flying level. The autopilot that's making you, to quote Chuck Yeager, auger in, right? I
Hmm.
think is one of those things that kind of is that setting the difference apart there, right? I made a decision in that moment. I was very clear as to what was going on. I knew what was going on. Yes, my people were pulling me away physically because I wasn't backing down, but I was also that I was making a choice to not do that. I was making a choice to stand in the way to make sure that it doesn't go a certain way. I think that's something that's really important and very stoic as well. So Cato, as you were mentioning, he took up arms against Julius Caesar and ended up
Yes.
uh, fighting and losing at Utica, right?
Hmm. That's right.
And the Cato knew what the circumstances were going to be like, and he knew what was probably going to happen if things didn't come out on the side that he was hoping for in that battle. And I think that's the thing. It's almost a responsibility thing. What was interesting in the circumstances at the beginning of this interaction with this person was one where uh, the initial exchange was asking about littering in this creek, which was down a ravine, like it's not easy to get to, and their response was, "Oh well, I'm going to go pick it up after," and it was like,
Yeah.
that's odd. Like, and that was the thing that threw us because the exchange was like, what? Like, how does that even possible? You can't even get down there. There's like a fenced off thing. And so, it was sort of like, well, this is the difference. There's a responsibility there, right? Where that is just not being taken.
Well, it
And that
indicates that
was an
they knew it
interesting
was
one.
wrong in the first place, right?
Well,
Because you
exactly,
knew they
because
weren't
they
going to
got
go get
caught.
it. I mean, why
Yeah.
throw it out of your car then say
Yeah,
you're going to go,
exactly.
right? So,
Exactly.
but they couldn't, they didn't have an argument,
No, they
right,
didn't,
of
and
why
unfortunately,
littering
yes.
would be a good thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a responsibility thing that's there. What I find interesting about this as well, because of how I am with my retrospection that I always do, is it's highly, I hate to be this person, but it is highly likely that I've thought about this a lot, and I've thought about this and asked the question like, what could I have done differently? Did I handle that correctly? And you were mentioning journaling. I mean, I'm probably going to fill up pages with this, but the thing is that you have to ask yourself on the flip side, like, did that person ever ask themselves that question? Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know that person, and I don't wish just I do not wish ill upon them, nor do I wish any affront towards them. They obviously felt a certain way about whatever happened, but I was sort of interestingly going, I'm the kind of person who will look to try and make it better for myself, right? When in reality, Not everybody does that. So I also I think it's important to note as well that I think if you experience one of these moments on your own, not you, Mick. Well, maybe you have, but like as a
Uh,
person in the world who experiences something like this, I do think it's important to ask yourself the question of, did I handle that well? What could I do better next time? Right? Do think that's a very stoic response. I mean, Marcus writes numerous pages of the meditations from the battlefield. Well, not from the like at
yeah,
camp, as he would say. He
yeah,
says
yeah.
at camp, or he says par ad carnuntum, meaning at Carnuntum, which at the time is the northeastern frontier of the Roman Empire, where he is fighting the Marco Manni, and he's literally going like, okay, I got to do this better next time, right? And you kind of think to yourself like, so someone at the extreme height of power who is essentially thought of as infallible by many people because the Roman emperors become godlike in their eyes, right? And eventually, and they achieve a sort of apotheosis, right? Where they get elevated to this godlike status. Excuse me.
Hmm.
Even in that point of power, he's saying, "I got to figure out how to do this better next time." Like that's a really powerful message, and so I would urge anybody who experiences something like that. I hope it doesn't go negatively. I hope there's no consequences from that, and it de-escalates on its own. But afterwards, I think it's very stoic to go, "Hey, how did I do there? I don't know that I did well there. I'm sure that I didn't do certain things right, but I'm sure I was right in standing up, and that's really important
Yep,
to me."
yep. And so another reference for folks out there is the book on anger, right? I think it's De Ira is the Latin version for on anger
Yeah, yeah,
by Seneca, right? So I mean,
yeah,
there's a whole book on it um, by one of the pillars of Stoicism, the, the philosopher Seneca. And there's two parts that I would highlight for this. One that he really viewed, extreme anger, uncontrolled anger is I think his quote was, there's no plague that's done more harm to mankind than that. Um, and I think he's equating decisions on war and everything that comes from that as part of that uncontrolled anger. So do keep that in mind. If it's controlled, to Adam's point, or at least to Adam's experience, in my opinion, um, sometimes it's necessary. But if it's uncontrolled and irrational, it leads to bad places. And so you have the responsibility of yourself, right? Not outside events, but your reaction to them. And that is a big part of this. The other thing that Seneca highlights in on anger, or he highlights many things, but what I'm highlighting today is prevention is a good thing. And if there's things that trigger you, if there's people that trigger you, uh, I'm one that would advocate, at least people who care about my opinion, to try to avoid them. And people say, "Oh man, you shouldn't have to do that," and all that stuff. Life's short, and if there's people who are antagonists that are, let's just say it, total assholes, um, you don't have to grin and bear it, and you don't have to, always be the one controlling your anger. One way to do that is not be around them. So I would
yeah,
I would highlight that because a lot of people think, well, I have to be bigger than them, and I don't want to avoid people, and okay, yeah, I mean, you can have that opinion, but what I would tell my friends and people who are interested in my opinion is, you know, you can try, and you should be the bigger person, and you should control your temper, but you also don't have a requirement to do that all the time, and it's probably best just to avoid people sometimes. What's your thought on that, Adam?
yeah. I would agree with that. I
Uh,
mean, you have to be cognizant of what's going on around you for sure. I mean, it's what I have not what I don't think you and I are advocating for any idea that like there are horrible people around you right now. Sometimes the dialogue today is really rough because people talk about it like there's a lot of talk about law and order that's used in politics. Like, I'm a law and order politician, and they talk about things like at night there are roving bands of bandits all over the highways. You know what I mean? Like it's like
Hmm.
1772 or whatever. And I'm like, no, that's
Right,
not
right.
really the case, right? I don't think anybody thinks that's the case. But I do think we have to be okay with the idea that sometimes you do have to make a choice to stay away and not interact. I think, there's an old Taoist story which I try to remember in some of these circumstances where there's a town and there's these people in the town and they go out on the main street and there's a horse, this horrible horse that everybody knows that's like it's like a wild horse and it kicks people and it's maimed people and it's killed people and whatever, and they're all like, how do we do, we gotta figure out what to do, we gotta get past this horse to go to work, to go to the doctor's office, to whatever. And then they see this Taoist priest, this very famous Taoist priest, come out on the main street, and they go, well, we'll watch what the priest does, I'm sure he'll have a good way around it. And the priest looks up and sees the horse, and he cuts down an alley and takes a different street. And you kind of go like, that's, some people might look at that and go, well, that's a dumb parable. But I think in some ways, you can make a decision not to do that, and make a decision not to do the engagement. I don't think in our circumstance we thought it would ever go from please don't litter to getting threats against our lives. That was really an odd escalation that happened quite quickly. But at the same time, I agree with you that you can make a decision to do that. I mean, we need to feel okay with setting ourselves up in circumstances that are positive for us or for those we care about. And if that means staying away, then that means staying away. And sometimes that is the case. I think in some ways what you're saying parallels with this concept that we hear sometimes about Stoics. Like, we sort of turn the other cheek. Like, we'll get slapped, or we'll just sit there and take it. And in many ways, we will not. You do need to make a choice to act. Sometimes that act is to remove yourself from a circumstance. We don't simply sit there. We are not passive things that don't react and don't do an action, right? And I think
Hmm.
that's what really important thing. We were talking about this a little bit. I think I'm paraphrasing it a bit, but we were talking about it before we started recording about, sometimes you do have to do something. Sometimes that doing something is ejecting yourself from the situation, extracting, excuse me, yourself from the situation. So I agree with that as well. I think in many ways, what I would say in response to all of this is in some ways is like there are so many options to take, and getting slapped in the face or attacked while not reacting to it is I guess that's one option, but it's one of many that Stoics and I think people in general have at their disposal. And you just have to make sure that you remain in control of the yourself and your senses in the circumstance so that you can make the right decision for you. Because
Hmm.
anytime you don't do something dishonorable, anytime you make sure that people are protected and things do not escalate to a really nasty situation, I think that's a win, and that happens many ways. So I don't know.
Yep.
I'll be thinking about, like I said, I think I'm going to be thinking about this for a little while, just because it's something that happens so rarely to me. Because I'm known for my empathy and my communication skills in my work, in my private life, in my hobbies. That it's rare for something to happen in that way. So I'll probably I'll have it in my I'll have it in my head for a little while yet, I think.
Well, I think it's a good thing that you spend so much time reflecting. But I also think you did the right thing. So, for what it's worth, I would point out one of the other parts of Seneca's books that I always found really helpful, and I'll equate it to a friend of mine who had a famous temper, and I'll just give you two examples. He was doing something for work. He was trying to talk to me on the phone about the particular operation we were doing, and for whatever reason, he was at a fancy club, um, but a lot of the wealthy people, I don't know why, but assumed he was the valet while he was standing out front of the club, um, and it started to piss him off. And like the third the dude that handed him the keys to his fancy pants car, all of a sudden I heard this dude screaming and yelling, and I was like, I won't use my friend's name, But I said, what's going on? He goes, well, I got sick of these dudes handing me their keys, so I threw this last guy's key in the woods. Right? I was like, dude, I mean, are you crazy? And he's like, yeah, I should have thought through it, because now he's drawn a lot of attention to himself because this rich guy is screaming at him to go get his keys in the woods for his Mercedes or whatever. And just to give you an example, this guy's temper. I mean, and I'm not casting aspersions. Me and this guy almost got a fight. We're one of my closest friends at a bar about some stupid something, and if it wasn't for the third friend who was trying to break us up, starting to laugh like hysterically that he was having to break us up in a fight in a bar, and then it would have probably ended up in the Irish discussion and stuff. But just to give you an example of his temper. But one of the things that he and I talked about is you have to have this delay. If you can give that to yourself, you will save yourself so many um, circumstances that you'll regret. So whether it's saying something in the heat of an argument that you don't mean, but you're just lashing out to a friend that you can't really take back, whether it's launching this email to a coworker who totally, even if you were completely justified in saying what you said, you wouldn't say it if you waited to the next morning to send it, right? So me and him used to talk about this a lot because he would be the first. He was a genius, by the way. I mean, he had a didactic memory. If you got in a discussion about any followed Stoicism, Aurelius, he would tell you not only where Aurelius said the quote, but um, what part of the book was on, which part of the page. He had that kind of memory, right? So the best remedy for anger is delay, I think, is the exact quote. I don't have the same kind of memory as he did. But that is something I'd also put out there to really consider, whether you're having a political discussion that turns sour with your at your family reunion, happens all the time. Whether it's a close friend of yours you get in an argument about and you say something you can never really take back, right? You didn't even really mean in the first place. Or, you're actually doing something like out on an operation, and you, because of your decision to chuck the Mercedes keys in the woods, you're now in a bad situation. So I would just say, take that on board for what it's worth, not as somebody who's lecturing you, but somebody who's, uh, you know, had to make the decisions myself and didn't always make the right ones.
Yeah, and I think the delay is an interesting point. In some ways, the delay can be anything. Like I do this thing, and it was interesting because I was going to suggest a podcast topic in the future about how to deal with criticism. Because you and I, in our work, we are in leadership positions, and you get criticism as part of being in that. And I think one of the things that I have always learned in a meeting is like before you respond, take a breath or something like that, right? Like there's an interesting delay in your brain where you just get you can get 100% more clarity from just waiting, right? Which is so
Hmm.
weird to people because everyone wants to listen to respond rather than listening to understand and listening to prepare a response, right? But I think that's one of those things that I use a lot, like even during the escalation yesterday, right? I did try to take a step away a couple of times and make sure that things didn't get worse, but it was an interesting thing because I didn't like I wasn't it wasn't like 20 minutes of two people facing off with each other. It was like they were trying to extract yourself from these circumstances because you do need to take a breath for a moment. It's simple today too. It's simple with a 2020 hindsight. You get to look back and go, well, I totally messed up and I should have done this or that. But that's also, I don't think that's what people would say to do because that disregards the fact that you have a split second decision to make in that moment, right? Before somebody charges your partner or before somebody charges towards your family. But at the same time, if you can take that moment, I think it's very important to do so. I think it's very, I was sort of saying this before. To me, I think it's very human to think more, to not react, right? Like, but to be sort of proactively reacting where you think first before you do. We are we're well, depending on anybody's belief system, but ultimately, like, we are an ancestor of the great apes, right? And
Hmm.
the great apes, there's a difference in, there's something that makes us inherently human is this ability to free think, right?
Yep.
Like it is built into the socio, I'll say socio political structure of the great mountain gorilla, that they are inherently they do inherently turn violent, right? And that's sort of built into that. But as human beings, we do seem to have this ability to choose, and we do seem to do that. And so something I write a lot in my journal, because we talk about the journaling and being retrospective, is I will always be writing things like, it is part of the human condition to feel anger, to feel emotions. But I also write to myself, remember though, that as a human being, you are not an emotion filled animal in the same way, right? It is something that makes us different. Like there's that story about what's the first sign of humans being very different towards each other, and there's a story about there was an archaeological discovery of a person who had died, but their leg had been bound when
Yep.
it was
I know what you're
broken.
talking about. Yep.
Right, and there's this great discussion about it. It's like what makes humans human? It's like this ability. We're not unique to empathy, but it's this ability to think first, right? Like if you were in a if in a straight up herd of feral wild animals, right? One of them gets injured, right? Um, a lot of the times that injured animal, their time is numbered, right? They're going to be going away soon. If they will eventually pass away, because that is how that works, right? Herds don't generally stop for those beings that are injured. And in this circumstance too, I think it applies where you are thinking. We have the ability to think, and I try to always remember that. Like I have a brain with so many folds. No other being on the planet has that many folds in its brain, right? So, like,
Hmm.
let's use the folds, as it were, and that's what I have always tried to think for myself. And so, taking the delay to think, I believe, makes us more human than just a straight up great ape animal. This is a very abstract thought, and I know it's probably an
No.
odd one, but it's something that
Yeah.
has made me think in the long term that it's something that makes it different. Like if somebody takes your juice box, you don't punch them in the face immediately, right? Like we as humans have the ability to think before we react to something, and I just try to
And
remember that.
I think where I concur with you is use the folds, right? So i- we are animals, at least the way I view the world. We are
Yep.
part of the great apes. We're just a branch. Other animals have empathy, and quite frankly, our species is probably the species that spent the most trying to figure out how to kill each other than any species on Earth. But
Yeah.
using the folds, not just to come up with a new and inventive way to kill each other, but also to have the ability to pause, to reflect, to understand the consequences is part of intellect that we're given, or at least we have, and one that we should use for the benefit not just of other humans, but everybody, right? Because violence can cause destruction in every aspect of the environment, not just the aspect of that humans occupy. So I agree. That is something that I think ultimately it comes down to having the intellect to know how to control your anger. Not when, you should always control it, but then also to use whatever uh, force that you need for good, right? Not for bad, and not irrationally.
Yeah. For sure. We we and I think the rationality is a key part there, right? I was actually in the chapter I wrote for the book that you and I have worked on.
Which looks
Um,
like it might be coming out
which
finally.
looks
I don't
like
know
it
if you
might be
saw
coming
the.
out. I know, I did see that. They want some tweaks. Let's see what they say. But ultimately,
Looks
yeah, I
like.
think that might actually be coming out. But I think,
Yeah.
I was talking about that from rationality, and I think that's an interesting thing that humans have is this ability to reason, to think about that, right? Like we are not unique in the application of some reason or some technical thought. Like like apes use tools, they can use tools,
Hmm.
right? Heck, remember birds of the corvid family, like crows and ravens and magpies, they can make tools out of stuff and then use them. So, which
Absolutely.
is also weirdly unnerving in its own way, right?
Even
But
octopus, right?
yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
at the same time, we have this interesting ability to have rationality and empathy and like logic kind of come all together in this consciousness that lets us make these decisions. And I think that's something that's key there. I don't want to go too big concept because it's about we're talking a lot about how to apply this, but in some ways, I think I would always ask everybody, like, just try to think a little bit, take a moment, when that person's screaming in my face without taking a breath and they're going red and they're not able to back down. Like, I'm not always talking because I'm trying to get my head around what's happening. I think for that person, like, if you just took 3 seconds, I mean, heck, if they just said, yeah, okay, I'll go pick it up, right? That was my mistake. I shouldn't have done that. There's nothing happens, right? That's the rational response. That's the logical thought through. Yep, made a mistake. I have all the more respect for someone who says, I made a mistake. I'm going to correct it and fix it. I'm going to go pick up the trash, right? I have way more respect for that than someone who postures in an aggressive and threatening, well, and ultimately verbally threatening manner. So I think it's an interesting thing as humans that we can think differently than that. We can think in more control. So I would ask everybody to think that. You will. Marcus says. I think it's the first entrance. Marcus in all of meditations where Marcus says, today you will meet blaggarts and boastful and aggressive and angry and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera people. So you can't expect that you'll never have conflict. I think that's the thing. But as Stoics, but as humans, I think we have the ability to think and go
Yep.
forward with that rationality and reason that keeps us from being completely thrown apart. It's funny saying this because as you and I have both said, right, Stoics have been warriors in the past, right? But the
Oh
thing
yeah.
is like oddly enough, you and I have never met each other in person. We've had so many hours of conversations and we've never actually physically met each other. But I can
Yep.
tell that you're not someone who's going to just immediately react with violence, right? And I
No.
think I think that that's an interesting thing to put where being a warrior in your own way of even the defensive type that I was yesterday, where you stand up and say, "Do not come any closer. This is not okay. You need to back off." Right? Is still something that we can do as Stoics and be Stoic. It's just an interesting position to be in because everyone thinks we're Vulcans, and I'm always like, no, I,
Yeah.
I don't
No.
want to be Spock. I don't think I could be Spock's brother. Do you know what I mean? Like, I
Really.
don't think I could be anybody like that. So
Well,
we're always in the, go
I've
ahead.
seen violence at its worst, right? So I mean, I'm not unique, but among my friend group, who spent the last 20 years fighting in wars overseas, but I've seen it at its worst. And I can also say the people that I think have spent the most time around violence and have controlled it the best are the calmest people I know. And they're also the least likely to be braggarts or to bluster. I usually see people who are the big talkers as trying to make up for something. And that something is a lack of confidence and a lack of, uh, you know, belief in themselves. So it's also a sign of just pure weakness to be the guy or the gal, but let's face it, it's usually guys that run around being the bully, which is an easy way to sum up what we're talking about. They try to dominate people physically, not logically, and not that you want to dominate anybody anyway, but rather than using rationality, they just simply try to use force and intimidation. So I'm sure we'll have many more discussions on this, but hopefully this triggered some comments from our folks. Hopefully, even a paper or two.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we got a good start here, man.
Yeah.
I think we should go on to the next.
Yeah, I think so too. So I think this is an apt time to close how I have always wanted to close something like this, which is to quote the way Stephen Fry would close episodes of QI, where he would say, "Thank you all for listening, and please be utterly wonderful to each other," and sign off. Because I think Mick and I would both say that let's really hope for everyone to be wonderful for each other. But if you have to be in a circumstance like I was, keep your head on a swivel, keep your head under control. My rugby team in England used to have this saying. We used to say, "Head in the ice box, heart in the oven," and it's one of my favorite things of all times. Where,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah, that's a good one, dude.
that's the
We're going to
close.
use
Okay,
that. Yeah, we're going to use that.
yeah. So head in the ice
That's,
box, heart in the oven.
yep,
All right,
excellent.
mate. Well, thanks for this one. We'll talk to everyone on the next one. I hope you all do have an utterly good day after listening, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Pup and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pupandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pupandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pup and Porch out.